little homies. I bet you thought I'd forgotten you, didn't you? I didn't forget you. I've been holding you gently in my heart over the last few weeks. But it's just been super busy with work, so I haven't had time to do too much crafting. Plus, I did get distracted by some other stuff. I don't know what that could have possibly been. AliExpress. But now I am laser focused on this Yavin Hanger, which is going to be the third part of that trilogy of shelves. So we've got the Sandcrawler, the Cantina, and the Hanger. So thank you for all the suggestions of the Hanger. That's the thing that won out in the end. It's a big old project, so I'm going to break it down into 3 separate sections. Today we're going to do the Hanger and the backdrop and the lighting and the gantry and all the cool stuff. Second video, we're going to take a look at the vehicles, including where it all started with this massive plasticky X-Wing. You'll see why it's only got one wing later, so I'm going to chop into that and pimp it up and make it look cool and hopefully appropriate to Black Series scale, along with the refueling thing that lots of us had as a mini rig as kids, and then the thing that drives people around, transporter, I guess, I don't know. And then the third video, we're going to look at the figures themselves, so the crew and the X-Wing pilots, lots of customs there. So it's going to be a 3-video journey, if you're up for that. As always, I've used a mix of techniques of whatever suited, really. So a bit of 3D printing, bit of XPS foam for the first time. Here's the thing. I think you could do the whole thing in XPS foam and it would be pretty cool. But I didn't have time to do it all in XPS foam. So I've done a mix of 3D prints and XPS foam. So there's something for everyone, hopefully, as we go through. As happened before, it's too big to fit in my little painting cupboard. So I had to take over the kitchen table, with massive thanks to my wife, because I made a mess of our living space for like 3 weeks or something. So that's where we're going to go first, to the kitchen table. Hey, it's nice to be back, isn't it? You and me, chatting, doing this stuff. All right, let's go to the kitchen table. Actually, I lied. We're going to start in the shelf itself, not with an elf. And you can see it's about 1.20 meters wide and only about 40 deep, so it won't actually fit this great big plastic monstrosity. But I'm going to try and steal a bit of extra depth by making the bottom sheet slightly wider so it sticks out the back. Give me an extra sort of 10 centimeters, maybe 5 centimeters. So I'm just, with a spare shelf now, cutting a bit of 5mm XPS foam to the size of the shelf, and from there I'm going to then coat it with PVA glue, any old clear PVA glue here, and I'm going to add in some acrylic paints. I originally thought I was going to rattle can spray some of this, which obviously melts XPS foam, so I'm trying to seal it with the PVA glue, and also to give it a slightly more concretey, smooth texture. As part of my research, obviously I looked at loads of clips backwards and forwards of the Yavin Hanger in the movie, but also I came across some really interesting concept art. These are Scott McInnes, and as well as that, I came across some really cool fan art that's online, and I'll put links to all that below, and we'll come back to some of those a bit later. So lots of cool inspiration out there to try and get the right sort of feel and vibe of the hanger. Back to the concrete base then, still mixing up different shades of grey, trying to get the colour right and rolling it around. So this is really just a base colour, a sealant, essentially. That's my wife's hand. Did you see it? She made her appearance on camera there. So yeah, just rolling around, trying to get the colour right. Some different splodges of colour as well, because I didn't want an even colour. If you look, that concrete floor, I think, is actually made up of smaller sections of concrete, so like sort of small squares. Now, as you know, I'm not one to get too hung up on the details, but I just didn't want it all to look like one colour. So that's why I'm splashing the colour around like I was. To create this sense of depth, I thought the best thing to do was a bit like they did for the actual hanger, is to have a painted backdrop, or in this case a printed backdrop. So I found this rather wonderful image by Michael Yoshimura. I thought this would really give an incredible backdrop to the diorama and give a sense of depth. Obviously had to take out the pilot and then the droid just so that the scale would still work, and then printed out a rough bit so I could see, is this going to roughly work as a backdrop, and then took it down to Maidenhead Printers. Hello to the gang there, so they could print out a big backdrop for me. This is where the first of the bits of building come in, so let me explain where these came from. They're by Chavi's 3D, and he's made this as a set which you can get on Colts 3D, and you can see here you've got like an entryway and some columns, Also included in the set are the little ground lights and nice details and the mini rig. So you can buy it here, and I think that worked out to be about 15 UK quid. Or you can join the Patreon and have access to a whole bunch of his other cool stuff. So I think that's probably a better way to go. I hollowed out a lot of this model in the slicer just so I wouldn't be using a lot of filament, because when you size it up to 6-inch, it's big and there's a lot of filament use. So yeah, so I hollowed it out. Same with the column here, I hollowed that out. So at this point, I'm just trying to see, like, what have I got space for on this shelf? How's it all going to fit together? This is also Chavi's 3D. He's got the lot. That's on his Patreon. And then, obviously, the big beast with the wing off. I'm going to have to do a bit more hacking around. I wanted the columns to kind of frame the diorama, so we were kind of looking into the hangar as though from the outside. I'm going to jump to think about the hanging gantry you can see, just about see here. Now, I reckon this gantry is exactly the same gantry, not the posts, but the gantry itself is exactly the same as the one, exactly the same as the one in the Death Star. Luckily, Chavi's 3D has also made that gantry, albeit obviously with the stands meant for the Death Star. So I adapted the stands so it would suspend from them rather than stand on them, and I had to resize the gantry a bit itself because it would have dominated my diorama a little bit, so I shortened it, chopped out the middle basically. If you're interested in that process, ask me in the comments, because I'm guessing probably most people aren't. But it's a little bit faffy, that's all. And now I'm all sticking it all together, and I kept sizing it up against the rest of the diorama just to make sure it was the sort of scale that I wanted. This is what I ended up with, and we're going to do a bit more work. Now I'm going to think a bit more about the structure. So I've covered this in like a stone texturizer. It's basically like confetti that sprays on it, then a primer over the top. Not sure why I used that, to be honest. And then Zandri dust. And the combination of those three things gave me a slightly texturized stone effect. Now I'm thinking about the top of the archway, and I thought it would be best just to do that in this XPS foam. I don't know why I'm using the smallest half ruler in the world to cut like a really long line. But I got there in the end. That's the main thing. Gluing it all together with hot glue seemed to be the best way. Man, I burnt my hands a couple of times with this stuff. And you've got to be quick before it dries. But it seemed to work. It seemed to be one of the best ways to hold it. And then just to fill in any gaps, I just spludged a load of hot glue down the gap. Then I wanted to do the nice center stone at the top of the archway. So here I'm just making separate little bits, sticking them together. The nice thing about this sort of stonework is it shouldn't look too even, and that's how it ended up. But obviously I want to make it look like brickwork or stonework, so just marking in with a ruler and then chipping away with a screwdriver, because it was what was next to me at the time. But that seemed to give a sort of nice rough and ready feel, just to go over the edges, because it looked a little bit like I'd stuck it together with hot glue. Funny that, isn't it? So going over it with a bit of this filler, just poly filler, and where it needed to be smooth, just smoothing it out with a wet finger. Ooh, matron. And then just sealing it again with the PVA glue. And something really weird happened here. Answers on a postcard as to why this happened. Maybe it was something to do with the quick drying poly filler. Is it got really sticky and gunky, like, can you see? Like, there's been a weird reaction with the poly filler. Anyway, I picked that off, rubbed it off, it was fine. But basically, I've primed it now so that we can then spray it with the rattle can and not melt the XPF foam. Coming back to the floor of the diorama while that's drying, I need to somehow match this to the colours of the backdrop. So basically the shade and the tone need to feel continuous as it goes into the backdrop of the diorama. This is a little misprint that the printers let me have, so I managed to use this as a reference point while I was waiting for the big print. So lots of watered down black acrylic and just sort of dabbing off here. This is a long process, so I'm going to speed this right up. Here we go, hold on to your hats. I feel like I should have some sort of comedy music here, but this edit's taking long enough without it. At first I was a little bit hesitant as I was slapping on this paint, worried that I was going to ruin it, but as I carried on I got more confident, and then basically adding in black and then some brown and trying not to rub it all off, to be honest. That was the balance. And then trying to match up some brown again with the backdrop. Oh, R2 with a timely reminder there. Thank you, R2. And then as we get towards the back, just darkening down, so it feels like as we get away from the entrance, the hangar's getting darker inside and gradually blending in to that backdrop. So by the time we get to the back here, I'm basically just using actual black paint. I'm not watering it down at all. It's just pure black acrylic, and that gives us that really dark effect as we go into the backdrop. Now the archway is completely dry, so it's ready to be sprayed in the same way. So the texture, the primer, and then the Xandri dust. And you can just see at the back now it's been done. Here, just filling in with my Posca pen, just filling in between the bricks to create a little bit of depth. And we're going to do a bit more weathering on those in a second. Back to the gantry, and now just filling in with some perfect plastic putty. The perfect plastic putty. Filling in with that, just where the 3D print was a bit rough or where the join lines were. This is not any fault of Chavi 3Ds at all, it's just my print and my join lines. Here, just then weathering up, so I'm treating the buildings exactly the same way, the temple, the same way as I treated the floor, so trying to blend it in colour-wise with the backdrop of the diorama so it all looks part of the same world. So starting with that brown that I roughly matched to the backdrop, and then wiping most of it off and putting some more on and wiping most of it off. That's what this process looked like. But going particularly over the joins, anywhere that will be shadow. I actually found the tea towel useful, but also just smudging around with my finger, I found that took off less. So in the end, I was just sort of doing it with my dirty little mitts. The final bit was adding the shadow to the back here, so it sort of blends as it gets darker towards the back of the diorama. Here I found what can only be described as a lifetime supply of moss for £5, I think it was, from The Range, which is like a UK value bargain homeware shop. And I'm just chopping that up nice and small because around the diorama I just want to spread around the walls some little patches of moss, because Yavin Temple is sort of a bit being slightly reclaimed by nature, I think, like those Cambodian temples in Phnom Penh. Is it Phnom Penh? Siem Reap? I don't know. No, it's Angkor Wat in Siem Reap. Just move on, Crafty. This isn't a travel show. Here I'm not spraying caterpillars. That was little sods of grass. So again, they're all slightly different shades of green, so I'm trying to bring it into the same kind of tone as the rest of the diorama. And then I'm going to mix the moss with some PVA glue, but unfortunately between now and then my wife knocked it on the floor and hoovered most of it up, so you know, the temple isn't as mossy as one might have hoped. I did try and airbrush this, but you can see what probably happened. Yeah, most of it went all over the place. So I'm just dropping in some brown and mixing it in with my fingers. And then as I was examining clips of the film, look, in the ceiling there's these lights. And once I'd seen them, I thought, well, I've got to try and make them. So I made these in the bamboo slicer, just using primitives. And so I've got like a thing to attach them to the ceiling. And then this is what I'm going to fix them up to the roof with, and there's a little channel there for the wiring which also goes through there. So I lined them all up, I printed them out, and boom, hot out the oven. And so just taking the supports out, so I made them nice and hollow, well, hollowish anyway, and then the tube is obviously, that's hollow, so the wire can run up to the ceiling. So we're going to get on with those. You can see also I printed out the lights, the floor lights, but because when you upscale them, this piece was quite thick, so the light wasn't getting through. So I just thinned that bit out a little, and it's just in a clear filament print. So that was all nice and simple, ready to paint up. Speaking of spraying, just sprayed this with a rattle can for car alloy wheels, just a cheap silver spray. And this is gunmetal, just going over all the edges. So I approached it all in the same way to dirty up all the edges. And then I wanted the bottom to have what would look like glass, so thank you Bodhi Rook, everyone's favourite donor. And then sandpapering down a bit of that clear plastic so it's frosted, but I needed something else to finish that, so I made these surrounds. So I'm just going to stick those onto the bottom of the lights, but they're just cut-offs from the lights themselves, so I just slice the bottom off the light. Here, dirtying up the gantry, same stuff really, just going around, even though that won't be seen. particularly, but just dirtying it up. And I decided I was going to use magnets to hang them from the metal shelf above. So that's what's going to hold it in place. These bits I decided to spray copper, so just gaffer taped them, decorator taped them off. I had a bit of a gap here, a join in how I stuck it all together. And this is from an Indiana Jones figure, I forget which one, maybe Indy? I don't know. But it does very nicely just to cover that little gap and add a bit of extra detail. Bit of silver dry brushing on this little bit of cable cover, just to give it a bit of extra je ne sais quoi. And there we go, that's kind of finished. I needed an extra column now at the back of the diorama because there was a gap I needed to cover, which I'm going to show you in a second. So now it's starting to take shape, which is cool, and I was plotting out where are my lights going to go and so on, so I was just sort of laying out, there's the gap that I needed to cover. I've got a bunch of crates and things. Some were given to me by Joe, thanks Joe, and some are Landspeeder Luke, and some are from Jarvis 3D. So I'm just hitting them with a few sort of various 70s style colours, and then where necessary either painting or marker penning over. Those crates took ages to paint, the black bits, but they're free and they're very cool. So I'll put the link for those in below in the description. And then just again dirtying everything up. So basically got anything that was an edge I went over with some black or gunmetal, one of the two, and just sort of dirtying up. Most important thing here is keep that pinky on the left hand out. Let's remain gentlemanly as we spray paint here, chaps. Filling in then at the end of the crates, it's got a really nice silver. There's so much nice detail on those crates. I really recommend them, but it takes ages if you want to do the black patterns like I did. I was regretting it halfway through, but it was worth it in the end. And then all the lines, just painting in a little bit of grub, and they start to look nice and dirty. And then over the top, a little bit of silver dry brushing, just so it looks like it's been chipped and bashed about a little bit. And that's the finished bit. Coming back to these lights now, marking where they're going to go, making holes in the foam at the bottom. And these are all 12-volt lights, so I like to keep things super simple so I can just attach it to a 12-volt adapter. If you want to look in a bit more detail how I do my lighting, take a look at the Cantina video, which I think I explain it in a bit more detail there. This is obviously the underside of the floor. Was that clear? Maybe I didn't make that clear. So this is the underside, and then a little bit of soldering here and there just to make the joins good, and then sealing with those shrink wrap. I probably should use a heat gun, but I don't have one, so you know, best to burn your fingers with a match. Do it the old-fashioned way. As always, apologies to any electricians that might be watching. Please look away. Where I couldn't use the shrink wrap just because of how the wiring was, I covered them over nicely with some electrical tape. And then obviously checking everything to make sure it works before I got too far down the line, and checking the lights. Yeah, they all work. Pretty cool. So just one 12-volt LED in each of those lights. These are from the Jarvis sets. I think they're generators, but I didn't have the space to use them as a whole block, so I just I sliced a bit off and then weathered them up, and just going to have them sort of providing a bit of backdrop to the side. Now just weathering up the floor lights in the same way I've been doing with other stuff, spraying it a bit dirty all over the edges basically, and then we're pretty much there. About the only thing I haven't been able to show you is putting on the moss and the vines onto the brickwork, and I just did that with PVA glue, and then it was a bit shiny, so I had to matte it down with some matte varnish spray. Have a look at progress so far. base is underway. As always, let me know what you thought in the comments, particularly if you've tried this diorama or the vehicles or any of the figures from the Yavin Hangar. Please do put some pictures in the community page. I'd love to see what you guys are working on, particularly if I can steal some ideas for myself. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. If you've already subscribed, I see you and I appreciate you. If you haven't subscribed, come on, what are you waiting for? And I will see you on the next video where we're going to get into all the vehicles and all that fun stuff. All right, take care of yourself. See ya.